sailors of Reddit, what's the most unusual thing you've experienced while at sea?
I was on a run between California and Hawaii, and I was out on deck doing rounds on deck equipment, checking oil levels, etc. I saw one of those free-fall lifeboats just hanging out in the distance and was like, what the hell? I called the bridge. They said a ship accidentally dropped their lifeboat a few years ago, and now it turns up from time to time. Was glad to know no one was on it, but it gave me a brief scare.
Being numb to seeing a lifeboat at sea seems like a terrible thing to me.
In the horror story version, you would then pass the actual known abandoned lifeboat a few hours later.
Lots of crazy little things, but I was on a ship that lost a man overboard in the Atlantic. Reports were that a lifesaver was thrown immediately after he fell in. The lookout said he saw a swell overtake him as he was going toward the lifesaver, and that was it. We searched for hours, never seeing a single sign. Searchlights in the water. Dark-shaped swimming past them. Makes you realize how small we are in nature. Still think about it to this day.
Terrifying.
It really was. Think he was only in the water for less than a minute before he disappeared. Weather was good, not during winter months. Just large swells. We really little specks, all things considered. Just south of Jacksonville, Florida, not far offshore. Relatively calm day, and 100 yards away from us, a giant manta ray with a wingspan of maybe 15 feet jumped a good 8 feet or so out of the water. Thing looked like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I think it could have crushed/sunk our 27-foot boat if it happened to land on us. I spoke to some Salter types in the area, and they said what I saw was not too common, but far from unheard of. Apparently, the largest one found had nearly a 30-foot wingspan. I simply had no idea such creatures existed, and was awed almost to the point of disbelief, and almost to the point of wetting my pants, to see one in that setting. Not mine, but from a closer friend who used to work on a squid fishing boat in the south of Argentina. He said it was pretty late in the night, around 3 a.m, outside it was pitch black, so some of the crew and the captain were outside just having a smoke when they saw on the horizon an almost faded orange color. They were wondering if it could be the sun, so the captain decided to go in that direction. After a while the orange color started to be more and more solid, and suddenly it looked like it was a distant city and its lights. They were deep in the Argentinian Sea, and according to the GPS, they were nowhere close to coast. By this point everybody got up and were outside trying to understand why there were lights in the middle of nowhere. The captain kept going closer and closer, and according to my friend it was like hundreds of orange lights just floating over the sea. When they finally got closer enough, they realized it was hundreds of boats fishing. All with Chinese flags, fishing illegally in Argentinian waters. Someone called on the radio, saying something in another language. The captain didn't reply. They reported it to the Navy and went away because it could be dangerous. But he said it was like a city popped out of nowhere. Back in the 90s/early aughts I used to fish commercially for sea scallops in the Gulf of Maine. The boat I worked on was an old New England dragger, built in 1926, wood hull. It was all sorts of creaky and groany like you would expect an old wood boat to be, and when you were below deck you could actually see the hull breathing, expanding and contracting as it rode up and down the waves. It was pretty freaky, but also kinda cool at the same time. Anyways, we mostly did day trips, but at certain times of the season would venture further out for longer overnight trips. On more than one of those occasions, at night while down in the bunk trying to get some sleep, I would suddenly hear sharp rapping on the outside of the boat, distinctly like the sound of someone knocking on a wood door. Sometimes it was a one and done. Sometimes you'd get one or two at a time in waves throughout the night. Less often it would repeat over and over, almost methodically moving around the boat for several minutes. It might start under your feet, then right beside your head, then switch to the other side of the boat, further down, etc. And then just suddenly stop. Aside from the fact that we were miles out at sea, the boat's draft was 6.5 inch, and almost all the knocking was coming from below the waterline, so there is no way it was a person doing it trying to play a prank or something. I wasn't the only one to hear it either. The captain admitted to hearing them sometimes while he was down there, and at least one of the previous owners of the boat had heard it before too. His theory was that when a scallop bed becomes too crowded, they would migrate by swimming up into the upper water column to find new areas to populate, and as we drifted through the school or whatever you call a group of migrating scallops, their shells banging into the hull was what made the knocking sounds. No idea if there is any validity to that, and I'm not convinced a sea scallop shell could knock as loudly and forcefully as the sounds we were hearing, but damned if I have any better explanation for it. I was surfing on an aircraft carrier, either the USS Midway or the USD Independence, I can't remember which one, and went through a typhoon off the coast of Hong Kong back in the early 90s. There were two events that happened on the same day. The flight deck was cleared of all equipment and the hangar bay was chockers. The hangar bay doors were mostly closed with the port side stern door and the starboard forward doors left partially open to allow airflow. I took a shortcut across the hangar to get to a ladder that would take me up to the squadron ready room. I stopped to look out at the sea. There was a cruiser about a quarter mile from us. I watched the bow dip down into a trough and saw the screws come out of the water. The cruiser literally disappeared into the trough before cruising up the other side of the wave. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until I saw its bow start to rise up the wave. I continued up to the ready room to deliver the papers I needed the skipper to sign. While I was waiting for him to finish talking to the XO, I was watching 5E flight deck camera feed when I saw this absolutely massive wave crash over the bow of the ship. The flight deck was 20 meters, 60 feet, above the water's surface and the wave was higher than the bow. I was more afraid at that moment than at any other time when we were on station in the Persian Gulf. Was in the US Navy on lookout. Around 2 in the morning somewhere in the middle of the Pacific. I spotted a strange plane that was pink and blue flashing lights. These are not normal colors of plane lights. Control insisted it was a satellite because they couldn't see it on the radar. Wasn't no damn satellite. It was much bigger than any stars around it, the usual size of a plane in atmosphere. Or some kind of rocket maybe? After a few minutes, it disappeared. No, I don't believe in aliens, but we weren't near any sort of landmass for hundreds of miles.